So, a while back I caught my first glimpse of Katana Zero, and it immediately caught my attention. For all intents and purposes, it seemed to be an interesting riff on Hotline Miami, swapping the top-down perspective instead for a side-scrolling one, but still retaining that need for lightning-quick reflexes and on-the-fly decision-making in order to create this single, smooth, unbroken run through any given level. Fast forward to today, and I've finally been able to get my hands on the thing, and precious few things seem to have changed since that trailer, save for the art style, which, in my estimation, seems to resemble something closer to, let's say, Metal Slug than anything else. Not that that's a bad thing, it's downright charming, is what it is. And the gameplay is exactly what I expected it to be. You gotta hit first, you gotta hit fast, and you've got to hit hard. One hit from an enemy will send you all the way back to the beginning. But what's really intriguing about this is the idea that the ability to retry a level over and over until you get it right is actually baked into the story of Katana Zero itself, because as it turns out, your character actually has the ability to perceive potential futures, which justifies all of these repeated failed attempts until you finally do one, that essentially makes you look like a badass and, crucially, gets you through in one piece. Aiding you in this endeavor is the presence of the Slowmo, which predictably slows down time for a limited duration and makes certain encounters just a little bit more manageable, doubly so if you've got multiple enemies wielding weapons such as shotguns and rifles. The Slowmo, although not strictly necessary, will also make it much easier for you to deflect bullets and send them, crucially, back into enemies' faces, which is, I gotta say, quite satisfying indeed. That's not to say that every level you attempt here is going to play out in exactly the same way. There's actually quite an astonishing amount of variety throughout the relatively brief runtime of Katana Zero. A great example being this level here, which has you sneaking through a dance club in order to reach the backstage section without being seen by the guards, and to do so, you can blend in with the crowd and throw a few shapes of your own. All things considered, I'd say that the stealth sections here in Katana Zero probably form the biggest departure from its core gameplay, but it never really lasts too long to feel intrusive, and when you get back to the business of slicing and dicing your enemies, it's always eager to add new, interesting elements to the mix. For the most part, these elements will manifest in the form of a steadily escalating roster of enemies for you to deal with, each of which bringing something a little different to the party, forcing you to deal with them in their own particular ways. For example, a standard gun-wielding enemy can have that bullet deflected back in their face, but if that enemy's wielding a shotgun, it's probably best to roll through lest the other stray bullets catch you instead. And stack all of these enemy types in one room, you got a recipe for a very hectic fight indeed. Fights that will regularly force you to dig deep and use every tool at your disposal, which includes a steadily increasing roster of throwable items too. What starts off as relatively simple stuff like throwing a bottle in an enemy's face soon upgrades to things such as Molotov cocktails and smoke grenades, the latter of which obscuring the vision of your enemies and giving you a bit more of a fighting chance. On top of that, you'll also be asked to deal with the occasional level hazard, be it a conveyor belt that might make it a bit tricky to judge incoming projectiles, or laser grids that can disintegrate both enemies and yourself if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. All of these elements are introduced in such a well-paced fashion that the combat never really has a chance to feel stale or old hat. It's constantly upping the ante, asking you to deal with slightly more each time. And what you're left with by the time you reach the other side of a level is just this tremendous feeling of satisfaction and achievement. And even then, Katana Zero continues to find new ways to be inventive and screw around with its core gameplay ideas, and to discuss them any deeper than that would potentially spoil some of the surprise, so I'd rather leave that for you to discover for yourselves. Another area of Katana Zero where there's an intriguing degree of screwing around is in the narrative itself. Between missions, you'll have opportunity to converse with various characters, be it your handler or other people that you meet along the way, and you can discover a little bit more about the world, about their personalities, or, if you choose to, you can just completely derail conversations altogether. Now, what makes this particularly brilliant, in my opinion, is that this is not just for effect. This isn't you being allowed to be a dick because haha, you can be a dick. This is something that has consequences further on down the line. A great example of this happens relatively early on, where if you insult the hotel receptionist here, she's not got a lot of sympathy for you when you come back down through the lobby after finishing your job, so of course she rats you out to the police, providing you with an additional battle for you to fight through, which, yep, caught me very much off guard. From that point onwards, it was clear that this game is making a statement when it comes to those red dialogue options, that something significant may happen if you push your luck too far. And what I thought previously was just going to be a nifty way of skipping dialogue that you didn't care about, suddenly became a way of making you sit up and pay attention. Now granted, none of the choices you make here will result in a vastly different playthrough. The story, as far as I can tell, does not completely splinter off depending on a dialogue choice, but it does affect it in a variety of subtle and interesting ways, to enough of a degree that I fully intend to play this through a few more times just to see what I can wring out of it. As for the story itself in Katana Zero, it's an interesting tangle, one that weaves together a slightly ham-fisted Vietnam allegory with government conspiracy, experimental drug-fueled death squads, and an overarching mystery that extends into our lead character's past. It's something that's told in a fractured fashion, but one that for me was no less compelling for it. It had twists and turns aplenty, it had sections that were quite frankly trippy in terms of presentation, and all the way through I found myself very much engaged, even if it did go to some very dark places. If there's any criticisms I could bring to bear against Katana Zero, in the grand scale of things, they're relatively inconsequential. There was an issue I ran into a bunch of times that was irritating for a hot minute, where enemy would find themselves in a position where they could nail me from off screen with a bullet that I couldn't see coming, but I got over it. And the only other prominent thing that comes to mind is that it's pretty damn short. It took me just shy of 5 hours to get through Katana Zero, and on that front, it does feel like there was a bunch of story chopped out. There is definitely gonna be extra story added to this later on down the line, and when you get to the end of it, you'll know exactly what I mean. It ends on a cliffhanger that feels like they just needed to push the game out, but what's here is still extremely strong stuff in my own personal estimation, and well worth the price of admission. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the rest of it when it's ready, but it would have been nice to have all of it, present and accounted for. But until then, I'll certainly be replaying this a bunch of times because the combat is just that tight. It feels great. The feedback that you get when you strike an enemy is absolutely on point. The soundtrack is just really nice mix of bluesy down-tempo stuff for when you're in the intervening narrative sections that give a real neo-noir flavor to the atmosphere of the surroundings that your lead character is in. But when you get down into the missions, you've got this propulsive, thumping electronica that is nicely introduced as actually being the music that Zero, your character, is listening to himself, because he puts his earphones in at the start of each section. It's just a really nice touch. But yeah, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this one. It's been a tremendous amount of fun. Difficult, but still a tremendous amount of fun. Basically, if you found yourself having a good time with the likes of Hotline Miami, then it's safe to say you're going to be in good company with the likes of Katana Zero. But in any case, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope I could provide some valuable insight into what you should expect from this one without spoiling too much. That's the crucial point for me, because, like I said earlier, there's some surprises in here that I feel are best experienced for yourself. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, maybe you'd like to gain early access to my videos before anyone else, well, if that's the case, you'll find the link to my Patreon page in the description below. But until next time, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.